So Stephen, being the exemplary father he was, sarcastic, he never watched my younger sister, because to him, watching her was like babysitting and too time-consuming. I always watched my younger siblings. My mother worked a graveyard shift. That way, she could always be there in the morning for us when we needed her. That being said, my younger sister was always with me, even when I went to bed. When I was about 11, I would have to sleep with my younger sister, who was 6 months at the time, on the couch in my parents' room, because Stephen couldn't be bothered at night while he was sleeping. One night, I woke up out of nowhere, like I was wide awake. The couch was in front of the bathroom, and I saw a ball of light fly from the bathroom and stop directly in front of the couch. There was no reflection of it, and there were no other lights in the room but this one. This is the time where I knew I could feel energies, but I couldn't distinguish whether they were good or bad. So immediately, I start flipping out, because why is there just a random orb of light 3 feet above my head? No one else awake, and I close my eyes and start praying this thing goes away. I was thinking to myself, someone please wake up. Someone please help me. Someone turn on the TV. That's when I hear a female voice say as clear as day, "It's okay," says my name. "I'm not here to hurt you. You're okay." At this point, I've quite literally shit my pants and I'm about to cry in fear, but I can't move or talk. Then Stephen out of nowhere sits up and says, "Quit talking." Mind you, his eyes were completely closed during this entire transaction. He gets out of bed, walks towards the TV, almost stumbling as if he had very little control of his body, turns the TV on and gets back to bed. When I woke up the next day, I asked him about the night before and apologised for disturbing him. He didn't remember even waking up. So we recently completed building a house on some land in northeast Oklahoma that we've owned for a few years. While we had met the people who live on the neighbouring property, we never really got into the history of the area. But now that we've moved in, we've made many more opportunities to talk, and one thing one of them told me really got my attention. He told me that he and his family had lived within about a 5-mile radius of our property for 3 generations. This guy's in his 70s himself, and he's seen many things happen in the area. He told us that he inherited the land he currently lives on in the 60s. At the time, it was empty land, and that he planned to build a home on it, but the property was covered in honey locust trees. If you aren't familiar with these trees, do a Google image search. They're nasty, thorny trees. And he needed to clear them out first. He hired a bulldozer operator to clear out and pile the trees for burning. My neighbour had long known of 2 headstones on the property, marking the burial site of 2 Native American girls/women who died in 1909 and 1912. This wasn't a widely known gravesite. The only clues that it was there at all was 2 sandstone headstones that were in rough shape and had been completely overgrown by the time my neighbour got the property. But my neighbour made sure the bulldozer operator knew exactly where the headstones were and told him to avoid the area. But when my neighbour went back out to burn the trees, he noticed that the overgrown gravesite had been completely cleared out and the headstones were nowhere to be found. My neighbour searched for months for the headstones, but with no luck. To make sure that no one else interfered with the gravesite and to show respect to those who were buried, my neighbours built a rock garden in the general area they knew the graves to be. So back to today. Ever since we've moved into our house, we've had many strange experiences. When we were first moving in, we found a dead coyote in our water heater closet in the garage. We're constantly hearing strange noises throughout the house, like hearing someone coughing in an empty room, or hearing footsteps in an empty attic. But the most disturbing thing is the strange noises we'll occasionally hear in the woods at night. The closest thing I can equate this sound to is a woman wailing, mixed with some sort of animal whimpering. We've searched the area the sound came from, and haven't ever found anything. I'm a big outdoorsman, and am familiar with most of the animal noises of the area, and I've never heard anything like it. We had two dogs when we moved in who were both very healthy. Shortly after moving in, they both went downhill fast. One died about 2 months after moving in. We were told it was like an aneurysm that killed him. And the other one is pretty rough shape today. Does anyone know what's going on? Our house is about 250 yards away from the grave site, so that's my first instinct about what's going on. Before my mom married my stepdad, she worked full time. So I, 6 years old then, stayed with family or friends of the family while she was working. I remember I was supposed to stay with this older couple who were friends of my great aunt, and they were nice, but something about the property around their house made me feel off. It was still really early, since my mom had to be at work for 7. We got there just before daybreak. Fog was thick, making everything naturally feel eerie. The old man was still sleeping, but the little old lady greeted us nicely. I felt safe and happy around her. She was a very sweet lady. Once my mom left, I asked the lady if I could go play outside. Saying yes, I put my jacket on and she stayed inside while I went to explore their yard. The house was a decent distance from the road, so the driveway was long and it was lined with cherry blossom trees. I loved the way the little flowers would fall around like the trees like confetti. It was early spring, so they were in bloom. I remember being in the middle of the row of trees while the wind picked up, blowing the petals all around. There were so many, it was almost as if they had created a wall lining the edge of the tree line. Something caught my eye between the flowers falling, just on the other side of the wall of blooms. I shook it off as my eyes playing tricks on me because of the haze of flower petals. The only way I know how to describe it is as if a white flare from a polarized picture was blurred. It was as quick as a flash, though. I didn't think anything of it until I kept seeing it skirt around right behind the trees. I didn't feel fear, but a sad kind of happiness laced with curiosity. The blur came in a few shapes and sizes, so I couldn't make out if it was a child or adult, and it didn't give off either energy. I just felt it wasn't trying to harm me. Yet, I stood in the driveway almost playing with it, as it seemed to want to just stay out of direct vision. It wasn't until I was squinting, immersed in trying to figure out and wrap my mind around what I was seeing, that I felt a tap sharply on my shoulder. I still feel it as I write this. I hear the words, "You need to run," in a deep voice that drained the blood from my entire body for what felt like an eternity. I bolted to the house and watched the blooms fall the rest of my day from the kitchen, until my mom came to pick me up. Mongolia has a long history with the shamans, and they used to be one of the most respected, beloved people during the Genghis Khan era. Even in some history books, it's proved that Genghis Khan had his shaman. But after his death, Mongolia slowly started following the Buddhist path, which meant shamans would be treated as demons, and they had to work under the shadows to serve people. In Buddhism and Catholicism, shamans are viewed as demonic souls, using people for their own sake. It's been a case for some shamans, but not all of them. So in order to become a shaman, you have to get in contact with your lineage guardian soul, or ask another shaman to make the connection. Once you've done the connection ritual, there's no way back, which is hard. You'll have a bond with the guardian soul. There are 2 types of shaman. 1, white. Mostly concentrates on returning curses, boosting your energy level, driving away ghosts, finding lost things, future advice, and seeing the roots of problems a person is having. They have very good behavior and like to talk with everyone. They won't break the mechanism of life through their power and always refuse to do so. Somehow, when their guardian soul possesses the shaman, you'll feel warmth around you and most of your fears will fade away shortly. I had this experience. And 2, black. This concentrates on curses, awakening demonic presence, lineage curse, helping someone to get in contact with the dead. They are very harsh, and you'll almost feel the air becoming heavier. Never met one, but heard a few stories of them. Their equipment mostly consists of protection clothes with animal signs on them, and a drum which is used to call their guardian souls. They need a translator because guardian souls tend to speak an ancient Mongolian language, which is hard to understand. Their guardian souls can drink liters of alcohol, and after the soul leaves the body, shaman is very normal, and you won't even smell alcohol, which felt very strange to me. In some cases, they're just acting to be one of them and working for money, or someone is possessed by a powerful demon. There was a curse when a young boy thought he got in contact with a guardian soul, but later it turns out he was possessed by a demonic presence. People came to him to ask about their future or private problems. He was making lots of cash. His family almost worshipped him like a god, but things were heading in the wrong direction. After a few months, his body started to get worse day by day. No hospital or doctor could find anything wrong, and his family started noticing it was suspicious, to say the least. They decided to visit another famous shaman. Just by looking at his son, the shaman said, without a second doubt, that the demonic presence is already sitting on his left shoulder. Means demonic presence is already in full control of their son, and at this stage, he'll most likely lose his soul to the demon. After a long and hard ritual, they managed to save him. But in order to save their son, the shaman had to trade 10 years of his life to the demonic soul. Just wanted to talk about this to show the modern era made finding a real shaman very hard. The story of the cursed family. You can read from anywhere that some parts of Mongolia is still living in nomadic ways. The couple I'm going to talk to is one of them and decided to move to the countryside. They bought a gear and moved to the old gold mining region, which was far from the town. Husband would leave early for work and the wife would stay home. For a few days, they were living normally, nothing special. Until one night, the wife had done chores and she had to pee. It was dark outside and windy. While she was peeing, all of a sudden the wind stopped and it became very silent outside. She wasn't thinking much, but it made her a little scared. She tried to quickly finish, but she heard a man's voice whispering something in a creepy voice, but can't figure out the word. Finally, she heard someone saying, "All of you will die." And she quickly stood, but something hit her head so hard, and she fainted. After a while, the husband comes home from work and found his wife lying on the ground. Seeing her pants were tangled, he thought she must have been raped and quickly called the police and emergency. 2 days passed and the woman was still unconscious. Her mother came from the city with her brother. Police found no signs of rape and the doctors could not make a diagnosis. On the third night, her brother decides to stay with his sister and spend the whole night in the hospital by her bed. Seeing her sister in a very poor situation was hard. Her hair was disheveled and for a moment, she looked much older than she used to be. It was late at night and the boy decided to sleep till morning. He turned the lights off and lay on the chair. Since he came from a far city driving a car, he was very tired and quickly fell asleep. That night, he woke up to find that the room was very cold, but he sees something in the corner of his eye. A tall, human figure standing by his sister. He was scared and quickly turned the lights on to find nothing. Tomorrow morning, finally, her sister woke up, but something was very off. His sister was trying to say something while shaking horribly and started screaming loudly. Doctors came quickly and made injections to put her to sleep. Days passed, the woman wasn't getting any better, and doctors recommended she might be going crazy. But the family decided to take the woman away. Before they left, one doctor came to them and whispered to her mother, "Since the situation has gone this way, you should try seeing a monk or a shaman. That might help." They tried every possible monk and shaman they knew, but no one made anything better. So her mother decided to leave the town and head to the deep woods of Kuzgul, where they found a powerful shaman. While her mother is away, women's situation worsens, and now she's always naked and mumbling something that no one could understand. Finally, after a few days, mother came with the shaman. He quickly said after watching the woman, "We need to head to a place where this couple used to live as fast as possible. We can get there if we head out tonight. This woman is near death. The demon already has her soul. We need to take this brother. He's the same year with the sister." In Mongolia, zodiac year, there are 12 years named after an animal, and you can be the same year with someone 12 older or younger than you. They collected everything needed for the ritual and quickly moved. The closer they got to their destination, the woman was going wild, screaming and crying loudly. Finally, they start their ritual, and the shaman asks her brother and husband to hold onto the woman. And no matter what happens during the ritual, don't let her leave. During the ritual, they could hear other voices screaming, and women were trying everything to get loose from them. Then the shaman asks, "Your family has pedigree sheep. I'm going to give that sheep, and you won't get the same sheep for 3 years." They accept without any hesitation. Lastly, the shaman comes to the woman and whips on her head, then she faints. The shaman was very tired and angrily told the husband, "You know about this place. Why did you do this? And do you want me to talk, or you want to talk?" The husband cries and says, "Last year, a family with 2 kids used to live here, and they found big gold that is enough to make them rich for a few years. But mine collapsed. Later, the rescue team dug them out and found the youngest kid dead, holding tightly to the cold. I didn't know this would happen. It turns out that before the family never left the place where they lived and was trying to take the life of his wife. Before leaving, the shaman said, 'I gave them your pedigree sheep and my 20 years of life, but I can't handle them so quickly. Move away from here.' I know the story very well because I came from this town and our elders highly prohibited us from going there. But I knew about this story very late when I was in college. They never told how the family used to live there and what happened to them afterward. But it seemed like a very good lesson. We should be very careful about the past where we live." Growing up, I always knew I was a little different than most of my family. I could see what I should not be able to see, and I could hear what I should not be able to hear. I could look at a person and see their whole life and things they've been through. I could sometimes see and hear people who weren't physically there. When I would tell my parents, they just wrote it off as if I'd been watching too many horror stories, or that my mind was playing tricks on me. Nobody, and I mean absolutely no one, took me seriously. My first real encounter of dealing with a spirit that was no longer here took place in 2005 or 2006. I was a teenager in high school, 10th grade to be exact. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning. I was asleep on the living room couch. I awoke to this loud boom that sounded like it came from up the street. I remember sitting up on the couch, peeking through the blinds to see what happened. There was a car that crashed into this big gate. Apparently, this had been a high-speed chase and the driver jumped out of the car and took off running. This happened directly in front of my aunt's house. I hurried and picked up the phone to call my aunt to make sure she was okay and to see what's going on. So me and her were talking, and all of a sudden I hear a knock on the door, so I'm like, "Auntie Felicia, hold on, someone's knocking at the door." She goes, "At this time of night?" I responded back to her, "Yeah." So I got off the couch and I went to the door and I said, "Who is it?" And in a very low, soft, childlike voice, they respond, "Carolyn." I asked, "Carolyn who?" After that, they didn't say anything. Literally only about 3 to 5 seconds pass and I snatched the front door open and there's no one there. I paused for a moment because in my mind I'm like, what the hell? Because there's no way anyone could have left the porch that quickly. And even if they could, the way my porch was made, you could hear it creak or you could hear someone coming up or down the steps. So I just head back to the phone and I'd tell my aunt what happened. And tell her I don't know who that was and that the only Carolyn I know was the Carolyn my cousin JD was dating for years. As a matter of fact, that was actually her voice. I told my aunt I don't know how she left the porch so quickly. All of a sudden, after saying that, my auntie paused for a long time. "Hello? Hello? Auntie Felicia, are you there?" She finally responded, "Oh yeah, baby, I'm here, but I'm bothered." "Why, auntie?" I said. She responded back and said, because baby Carolyn that came knocking at your door has been dead for 3 months. I immediately hung up on my auntie. I was so baffled because I didn't know this lady was dead, let alone why her spirit was knocking at my door. Over the next few weeks, things got creepier and weirder. Across the street from where I lived was a fenced area with lots of bushes that anyone could hide in, honestly. I was sitting on the porch about 3 weeks after the initial incident. It was about 8 p.m. I was just on the porch, waiting to see if my boyfriend during the time was going to walk by. All of a sudden, I heard the wind blowing in one spot, nowhere else. Just this one spot, and then I heard footsteps running up the porch steps. I started screaming and ran in the house and locked the front door behind me. I ran past my mom into my room and shut the door. I was so afraid. I was in my room for a good 30 minutes. I still felt this uneasiness on me, so something told me to cut off all the lights in my room to where it was pitch black. I went to the window and looked out the window and damn near passed out. I saw this Lady Carolyn's spirit across the street, looking out the bushes, staring directly at my house. Something was so sinister about it all. She looked very demonic. Her hair was wild looking, her eyes had a red glow to them, her teeth were even different. What the hell is going on, I thought to myself. When I blinked my eyes, she was gone. I let out a sigh of relief. I finally managed to get myself together that night. As I proceeded to lay down, there was a knock at my window. Oh gosh, why did I get up to go look and see nothing? When I started to close the curtain, I saw her face directly at my window. She spoke and said, "Hey," in a demonic tone, and I passed out. I can't recall anything else after that. All I know is I never want to see her face again. A few years ago, I was a CNA, a certified nursing assistant. I worked at a nursing home and had a few encounters there, but nothing prepared me for everything that would happen when I started working at a hospice home. It essentially is where people go to die. People that are sick and don't have a lot of time. The facility was amazing and worked quickly on getting people in. I can make another post about everything I did at the hospice home if anyone is interested. The point is a lot. I mean, a lot of people passed away in the building, and a lot when I was working, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I always opened the window in the residence room after someone passed away. My way of freeing the spirit so they wouldn't be trapped. No one else, unfortunately, did this. On to the main point of this story. We have 2 wings of the building, and each wing has a huge linen closet. Tons of sheets, blankets, comforters, towels, washcloths and gowns, etc. And when you open the door, both walls are lined with racks filled with linen. You can walk down into the room a couple 100 feet and then turn to the right, and it's a little area where extra stuff is stored. Things for bed baths and hygiene things for the residents. You're completely hidden when you're in the area on the right. A resident woke up around midnight and wanted to get cleaned up, so I was going to give them a bed bath. I went into the linen closet and headed to the area on the right, and was grabbing soap, toothbrush, toothpaste, a little basin and other things. I heard the linen closet door open and close. We have 1 CNA and 1 RN on each wing during the night shift. I figured it was the nurse or the CNA for the other side. Sometimes we grab each other if we need help. I then heard a female voice. "Hello?" "I'm just grabbing stuff for a bath. Do you need help?" I answered, thinking it was the nurse. "I'm so cold." "I can bring you a blanket. Maybe I'll throw in a dryer again like last week," I laugh. I turn around and head to walk back down the main area of the linen closet, and nobody's there. I didn't hear the door open again, so no one left and there was no place to hide. I then feel someone grab my shoulder. I scream and drop everything as I turn around so quickly, and of course, nobody is there. I ran out of there so fast. I tried to tell the nurse, but I wasn't making any sense until I calmed down.
She stuck by my side the rest of the night. I didn't go back into the linen closet that night. When they grabbed me, it felt like it touched my bare skin, and it was so cold.
I used to work at a hospice home. I was a CNA and worked the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. For the most part, I did love my job, but there were a lot of encounters and unexplainable things, and I didn't love that part. Funny thing was, once I left my shift the next morning, the scary things that would happen would be pushed back to the back of my mind, and I was never afraid to go back to work until something else would happen. It was a normal night, and I was charting at my computer when I heard a loud smack like something falling. I was the only one on that wing as the nurse went to go heat up her lunch. I walked to where I thought the noise came from and stopped in the middle of the hall. I heard it again, and I jumped so high. I looked into the closet room, and it was a vacant room of a resident who had passed the night before. I wasn't working the night before, and the family didn't have room in their car to take everything, so they left a lot of stuff in the room, and they'd be back in a couple days to get the rest. There was a bookshelf in the far corner, as the resident was an avid book lover and had a ton. In front of the bookshelf there were 2 books on the ground. My first thought was that they must have been on the edge. It was logical. I picked them up and pushed them into the line of books so they wouldn't fall again. I turned to leave, and I hear 2 loud smacks. I turn, and the same 2 books are laying on the ground again. I could almost feel the cold hand on my shoulder again. I took a deep breath and put the books back. I was almost to the door. I glanced back, and I saw a very light shadow standing in the front of the bookcase. I didn't see the books move, but I sure heard them when they hit the ground, and I went running out of that room. The nurse was back when I arrived at the area where we sat and chatted. I told her what happened, and she kind of chuckled and went to go pick up the books. She wasn't gone 10 seconds. Her face was white when she came back. She didn't even make it in the room. In the corner, she saw a figure standing there. She closed the door and came back quickly. It was daylight before we grew a backbone to open the door, and everything looked normal. I picked up the books while the nurse stood guard. The room was empty that night when I came back. I'll tell you a story about something I experienced but can't explain, so the answer is really up in the air. I know it's hard to believe a random person on the internet, but let me say, this story is 100% true, and I just want to put it out there in a non-judgmental space. I was about 14. There was a family that lived behind us on an adjacent street, but you could walk between our yards like you find in American neighborhoods. It was late afternoon, maybe 6 p.m. There were a couple of girls that lived there close to my age that I didn't know too well. They saw me in my backyard and asked what I was up to because they were bored. We ended up hanging out, and they invited me over to jump on their trampoline. We talked and jumped for an hour or so. While jumping, I noticed there was a basement storm door on the back of their house, and I had actually never seen one, so I was intrigued. Most basements here just have normal stairs from the main level. I really wanted to open it and see how the door worked. I inquired about it, and the older girl said, "Yeah, we only go in there if there's a tornado. My mom says it's haunted." I'd always been dismissive of haunting and ghosts and said, "Oh, I don't really believe in ghosts." The younger girl giggled, and the older one was more serious. "Go down there if you aren't afraid," then she said, pretty much daring me to do it. Why does this sound so much like a movie? I accepted her dare and went over to the storm door and unlatched it. I pulled up the heavy door, and to my surprise, both doors actually came up at the same time due to the levers and gears. It was actually quite cool to me, so I closed it and opened it again. It was half lit from the few small windows in the basement, and a little cluttered with old junk. Not very dirty and no spiderwebs though. Seemed like a pretty normal basement. I went down the steps, and the girls actually followed me halfway down. I reached the bottom and looked back at the girls. The younger girl pointed at me to keep going.
I made my way closer to the opposite corner of the basement and looked around. It almost seemed like someone lived down there. Books were neatly placed, and there was a little couch with an end table next to it. I looked over to a clearing behind the couch, an area that was dimly lit from a nearby window, and I saw it. My whole body froze up for a moment, and I felt a massive adrenaline rush that started to shake my hands and water my eyes. About 8 feet away, a green-tinged but mostly white, almost transparent cloud of mist in the rough shape of a man was floating and half standing there looking at me. I heard the girls run up the rest of the stairs without words. I was locked on this figure, and it was locked onto me, frozen in fear, almost like we were both waiting for the other to make a move. I felt like it was watching me, but there were no eyes or a face, just a head shape in the mist. Nothing happened, but I stood there staring into the shape for at least 15 or 20 seconds. The shape very slowly rotated around, like you would expect mist to, but kept the same shape and position. It looked like it started to stretch out an arm. I immediately turned and ran, very, very fast, even though it felt like I was running in sand. I didn't look back. I just ran all the way up the stairs and out. I stopped at the trampoline about 20 foot from the basement door. The girls were gone. I looked back at the door, still wide open, and decided I had to work the courage to go close the door. I moved over slowly to the door and grabbed the corner, peeking over it into the basement. I didn't see anything and started to close the door. About halfway through closing the door, it was ripped out of my hands and slammed shut. It was loud, and I heard the steel sound echo through the basement. It was jarring. It hurt my fingertips, and it didn't do that before when I closed the door the first time. You actually have to push it down for it to close all of the way, with how the mechanism keeps it from possibly falling on your head. I stumbled back and caught myself from falling. The girls were nowhere in sight, so I just went home and sat in the living room with my parents, not saying anything. I never actually talked to those girls again. Every time they saw me, they would turn around and try to hide from me. They moved away after a couple of years. My guess is that they saw it too, and it affected them more than it did me. My parents still live over there, and sometimes when I visit, I think about it. You can see that storm door from the kitchen window, and it gives me pause every time I see it. I don't know what it was. I probably never will. It didn't change my mind that much about ghosts. I simply can't explain what I saw. As far as what I saw, it's so hard to explain in words. It's definitely the shape of a man, almost like if you used a projector to put a shape on a cloud of smoke, but it wasn't neat. Very wispy and not like an image. It had a very aggressive presence, and I felt like I was in danger. I felt the overwhelming sense of an imminent attack, which is why I was full of adrenaline and almost ready to fight for my life. I had a rough upbringing and had been in many fights as a kid, so I wasn't sensitive. The adrenaline was racking my body, and I was absolutely sore that night, like I just had my ass kicked. I just knew that whatever it was, if it was real, it was not friendly, and I was going to fight it if I had to, and run if I had the chance to escape. I actually have a lot of ghost experiences, but for now, I'll talk about the year I lived in a haunted house. I was 12, and my family had just moved us to a place called Kennewick, Washington. We were renting a one-story house from an older couple. My cousins, who I was super close with, helped us move in and stayed the night with us our first couple of nights. Weird stuff started the very first night. For one, the guest room had a really weird vibe that nobody cared for, so they decided to sleep in the living room. I recall hearing knocking on the walls, disturbing me from sleeping well. We all asked each other who was doing it in the morning, parents included, but none of us took responsibility. Another thing that would happen, every night that I was sleeping, my closet doors would open. No matter which house I've lived in, I've needed the closet closed to sleep. I got so scared waking up to see my closet doors completely open that I once tied a chain around the handles to keep the doors locked. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of the chain hitting the ground. I watched my closet doors open completely right before my eyes. I was so frozen in fear, I couldn't move. I could barely breathe, and I somehow fell back asleep that way. After that, I accepted that those doors would remain open. Also, every morning that I woke up for school and walked down the hallway, it would feel like someone rushed out of the guest room and followed me down the hall, right on my heels. I would sit down on a chair in the living room and feel whatever it was go past me and into our kitchen. I eventually got used to it, as weird as it sounds. When you live in a haunted house, you have no choice but to get used to what is happening to you. One night, I had a girlfriend sleep over. We had a great time eating pizza and staying up late watching movies. It was about 2 a.m. when we finally turned off all the lights and settled down on the floor in the living room. The curtains to the sliding glass door we were next to were open, and it was a bright moon that night, so we could easily see into my backyard and the details of it without issue. Just as it got quiet, I randomly said out loud, "Oh, by the way, this house is haunted." She says, "What?" And just then, 3 incredibly loud knocks hit the back window. We both looked outside and there was absolutely nothing. No wind at all even. She burst into tears and I had to calm her down by letting her know that nothing else would probably happen that night. And if I can live there and be okay, she'll be just fine. I'm honestly surprised she didn't demand to be taken home. I always enjoyed the ghost timing on that one. Some other things happened in that house, like stuff getting knocked off of shelves, feeling genuinely uncomfortable to be there alone, even during the day. We lived there less than 2 years, and I'm glad. When I was growing up, my parents would occasionally tell me the story of the time they played the Ouija board. It was when they were dating before I was born, and they had a crazy night with it, where it answered all kinds of questions. There's one thing my parents are not: liars. So these stories only intrigued me to find out for myself. When I was 17, I was a senior in high school, and I had my first serious boyfriend. We were both very curious to know if the Ouija board truly worked, so we bought one. My bedroom was in the basement, and we set it up on my bed. It was close to midnight. We lit candles, turned the lights out, and sat cross-legged on the bed, on each side of the board. We were supposed to pick a question and focus on it, with our index fingers lightly touching the planchette. The question we decided to ask was, will anyone talk to us? We must have sat there focusing on that question for about 40 minutes, occasionally shaking our hands out from getting tired of being held in that position. After about 40 minutes, the planchette started to vibrate underneath our fingers. Then, it slowly moved to the word yes. We stopped for a moment and looked at each other like, is this real? Then we asked, are you a spirit? And it moved away from the word yes and back to it. At this point, I noticed that I could feel a strange electricity moving throughout my body. I didn't like it. I've never felt it before or since. We decided to ask, are you nice? And it very quickly moved to the word no. Now, I'm riddled with terror. I exclaim that I cannot play anymore, and I go to pick the board up to put it back in the box. Except, the board will not move. Not a sliver. It felt as though it was stuck there with cement. I remember yanking with my entire body at least 3 times before suddenly it felt as if something got off the board. And I flew backwards with it in my hands. I slammed it into the box and closed it. My boyfriend's face was pale. He tells me, I have to go home. And I'm like, oh my God, don't leave me here. But he leaves. Here's where it gets even more scary. After I walked my boyfriend to the door, I went back down to my room. Only, it didn't look like my room anymore. Don't get me wrong, nothing changed visually. It was still all my stuff, but I felt like I was in a parallel universe. I felt so far away from all that is comfort and good. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm not a religious person at all, but I was so beside myself with terror that I didn't know what to do except to grab the Bible. I slept with it in my arms with the lights on. I actually slept with the lights on for the next week. I didn't tell my parents what I had done because I didn't want to get into trouble for playing the Ouija board in the house, or for my boyfriend staying over way later than he was allowed to. My room continued to not look or feel like mine for a couple weeks. Also, when I would get up for school in the morning, I would have to walk through a dark basement living room to get to the stairs because there was no light switch by my bedroom door for the living room. My bedroom door was in the back corner of it. So when I would first open my bedroom door, the light in my room could cast out into the living room darkness. And for a split second, I would see a black cat run from the patch of light into the dark. I would shake it off as my eyes playing tricks on me, but after a couple of weeks, I was eating breakfast upstairs with my family, and my 7-year-old sister exclaimed out loud, "I keep seeing a black cat in the basement." That confirmed that it was not a trick of my eyes. Also, about a month after playing the Ouija board, my dad says to me, "I don't know why, but the basement and the stairs have really bad vibes, and it's bothering me. Because when I bought this house, one of the things I liked that it had good energy." That's when I realized for sure, without a doubt, that all of this stuff was not in my head. I had haunted my parents' house by playing that game. I learned after the fact that I was supposed to say goodbye before stopping the game. I think that had something to do with it. Another strange thing that happened, I always slept with my bedroom door locked. A few weeks after playing the game, I woke in the middle of the night to somebody jiggling my bedroom door handle violently. In the morning, I asked who was messing with me, but everyone acted like I was weird for asking. About 6 months after playing it, my stepmom was cleaning the house, found the Ouija board, and threw it away. Things started to calm down a little bit after that, but it took years for that basement to feel okay again. It never went back to feeling the way it did before I played. I finally owned up to my dad and stepmom about what I had done. I wasn't in huge trouble, but my dad was like, "I knew the house felt different, damn it." To this day, I feel bad for bringing that energy into the home. After that experience, I want absolutely nothing to do with Ouija boards, and they are not allowed in my home. I learned. When I was 13 years old, my dad was getting married to my stepmom. Her side of the family owned a fishing cabin in the mountains in the very northern Washington state. It was her grandfather's, and it stayed in the family. This cabin was in the middle of nowhere. I'm not kidding. The nearest town was tiny, with a population less than 100. You have to drive up into the mountains on a dirt road for about 45 minutes to an hour to get to the cabin. It sat just above a small lake, very beautiful and secluded. No other cabins around. Nothing. Just the one. I'd never been to a place like it before or since. So I'm 13, my soon-to-be stepbrother is 10, my soon-to-be stepsister is 5, and my stepmom was pregnant with my half-sister. My dad and stepmom decided they wanted to have a very small wedding at the cabin. So we drove up to it the day before the ceremony. Everybody else who was attending would be arriving the next day, the day of the wedding. Except for my stepmom's youngest brother and his girlfriend. We'll call them James and Vicky. They were also arriving the same day as us, as we had planned to light fireworks and celebrate the night before. So another thing about this cabin, there's no television, no radio, no phones, only electricity and water. This also took place in the late 90s, when most people had pagers, if anything. Definitely not cell phones. So we're at the cabin, and decide to take the small rowboat out to fish for our dinner. It's dusk at this time. I remember I kept looking back up at the cabin to see if James and Vicky had arrived, because they were in their early 20s and young and fun, and all of us kids were really excited for them to get there. So my family and I are sitting in the boat, and I turn my head to look at the cabin again. This time, I see a woman standing on the patio facing us. She's wearing a long white gown. It looks to be made of lace. It goes up over her neck like an old-fashioned dress looks. Her hair is up, and she's waving at us. The only thing I can't make out are the features of her face. There's a man standing next to her, but he's turning to walk around the side of the cabin. He had a cowboy hat on and a Sherpa-lined leather coat. I got so excited I said, "Look, James and Vicky are here." My whole family looked up at the cabin and exclaimed, "They are here." My dad rode us in fast. We ran up the short hill to the patio, where they had just been standing. Nobody was there. No car in the drive next to ours. No note. No sign that anybody had been there. It was really weird. We all felt strange. My parents distracted us somehow, and soon we forgot because of the excitement of the wedding. The next day, guests are arriving, including James and Vicky. They said, "Sorry we didn't make it last night. We broke down on the way and didn't have the ability to call you because there were no phones here." It was no big deal. We were just glad they made it. Fast forward to 6 months after the wedding. It's Christmas dinner and James is over. Suddenly, the experience dawned on me for the first time since it happened. All I said was, "Hey Mom, remember that time we were at the cabin and we thought we saw James and Vicky, but it wasn't them?" James immediately interrupts me and says very seriously, "One time Vicky and I were at the cabin fishing. It was around sunset, and I looked up at the patio to see a woman standing in a white dress waving at us." Everybody at the table got very quiet. Then he mentioned the man in the cowboy hat and seeing him walking around the cabin a time or two. He and my mum got emotional and deduced that the man and woman must be their grandpa and his first wife. I haven't been to that cabin since then, though I wish I had. I get goosebumps every time I tell that story. I can still see them in my mind, clear as day. To begin, let me explain that my grandfather had the house built in Northridge, California, in 1969. The land was previously orange groves, so it's never made sense to my family how the house ended up haunted, unless there were unknown burials in the land. The main stories I would hear growing up from my dad and uncle were things like being tugged awake in the night on the shoulder or ankle, but nobody's there. Also, the upstairs was open, so you could see the hallway and the doorways while sitting downstairs in the living room. There was a railing along the hallway upstairs, which is why you could see, and the television was backed up against the bottom of the staircase. So sitting on the couch watching TV, you could see most of the upstairs in your peripherals. It was very common to see someone very quickly walk out of one room and into another room. Even the family dog would react to these happenings. Everybody who lived in the house accepted that it was haunted, except for my grandfather. Apparently, he called it all nonsense. After all, he was a man of science and logic, which is why it's funny that he's the only person in the family to have seen the full body apparition. It was a rumour in our family for many years, but my uncle had overheard him telling his wife, our grandma, that he came home late from work to find an old man with long grey hair standing inside in the entryway. None of us ever had the guts to ask him because he always shut down things like that. Well, the last time I saw him, I felt like asking, so I did. I said, "Hey Grandpa, there's a rumour in the family that one night you came home from work and saw a man in the house." He straightened up and his eyes widened. Very indignantly he said, "I did. I got home around midnight and I unlocked the door. And standing right inside was an old man with long grey hair, staring at me. I had no choice but to assume my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I went back outside and waited a minute, and came back in." To me, that absolutely proves that he knew it was a ghost. There's no way he'd walk into his house in the middle of the night and see a man in there, knowing his family are asleep and vulnerable, and then step back outside and close the door to see if it goes away. I have so many more stories about this house. I live only 5 miles from it, and I drive by sometimes for nostalgic purposes. I have a lot of beautiful childhood memories in that home, and I know for a fact there's no way the current owners aren't experiencing all the crazy that house has to offer. Sometimes I wonder if I should knock on the door and ask them. I'm really that curious. My My cousin, I'll call him Jeff, is about 5 years older than me. I was living up north in Washington at the time, and he lived down here in Los Angeles near our grandpa. He was probably about 19 or 20 years old when this happened. So anyway, my grandpa and his wife, my real grandma died before I was born. She also knew that the house was haunted. Decided they wanted to sell the house and move to the Puget Sound. I was really bummed about it. We had a lot of great memories in that house. Even though it was haunted, it had a great vibe. Except for when the hauntings were happening. So my grandpa and his wife were up north in Washington, handling the final paperwork to purchase their house. And they asked my cousin Jeff to stay down here and house sit the haunted house for them. He totally agreed. He was 20 years old, and it was a great chance for him to have a whole house to himself and get away from his mom and sisters. So he says like the first week and a half, everything's fine. Then one night, he's sitting in the room that the family refers to as the ghost room, because it's where most of the freakiest stuff happens. The ghost room was also the computer room. When you're sitting at the computer, your back is facing the doorway that opens into the upstairs hall. He said that he had been listening to Croc earlier, but at this point he had the radio off. It was pretty late at night and quiet. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him from the hall that he said sounded neither male or female, and it said in a very weird and quirky inflection, "Croc." He froze in fear. Like we've all grown up hearing all the freaky ass shit about this house and experiencing some ourselves, so he's immediately shitting bricks. He said it sounded like the house came alive. Like he could hear cupboards closing and people moving things around downstairs in the kitchen and family area, even though he was completely alone. He said it went on for hours, so we went to the next room, to the computer room, and curled up on the bed in the corner with the door open a crack so we could see out into the hallway. He said he started to nod off after a while. Then, something made him jerk awake just in time to catch a ponytail of grey hair and an elbow with a green shirt on walking past the bedroom in the hallway. He basically called my dad crying because he knew my dad would understand what he was going through and wouldn't think he was crazy. But instead of my dad calming him down, he just started feeding them all his stories that happened to him, which just led to my cousin becoming absolutely inconsolably terrified. He called my grandpa and told him he didn't want to watch the house anymore. My grandpa was pissed. Called my dad and yelled at him for telling Jeff all the scary stuff. My dad was like, "Dude, I wanted him to know that I lived through it and I'm fine. And other people have experienced it and it's been okay. He's a 20-year-old man, for fuck's sake." Always loved that particular story, especially when I get to see the look on my cousin's face when he retells it. I guess it's about time I mentioned that my workplace is haunted. I've been a bartender here for about 8 years. I don't want to say where, because it's actually quite famous, to the whole world. But nobody really knows that it's haunted except for the employees and previous employees. Most of us have an experience or two, although we do have 1 or 2 employees who have worked there for decades and said they've never experienced anything. But more employees have had experiences than haven't. I've been tapped on the shoulder, tugged on the shirt, and felt my hands on my back when no one is around and I'm alone in my space. Other employees have mentioned experiencing these things as well. Some have seen ghosts there. I honestly couldn't guess how many ghosts we have. A few, maybe. The building has 3 floors, and the 3rd floor is definitely the scariest. Most employees will attest to that. In fact, we had a bar back in the 60s who had to clean up the 3rd floor at the end of the night, and he hated it so bad. He's had so many things happen to him up there, but he speaks mostly Spanish, and my Spanish is very amateur at best. So he's only conveyed a few stories to me. He also doesn't like to talk about it. He points at his arm, then rubs it, insinuating goosebumps, and shakes his head no. My boss saw an old man in a mirror upstairs on that same floor. She was washing her hands in the bathroom with the door open, and when she looked up in the mirror, she could see the hallway reflected in it behind her, and she said an old man peeked out of one of the doorways and looked at her. She hauled ass downstairs and sent security up to look around, but nobody was there. Apparently, before I worked there, they had a security guard who was a really big dude. Really intimidating energy. One night, he was supposed to be watching the second floor while waiting to close up, and he was up there by himself. I guess he came down to my boss in tears, saying that he could never work on any floor except the first floor again. Otherwise, he'd have to quit. I mostly work on the first floor, and that's where most of my incidents have happened. The most notable one was catching in my peripheral a very short person in a white shirt walking super fast past my bar and into our kitchen. The movement struck me as strange compared to how our other bar backs moved, so I stepped out of the bar and checked the kitchen. Nobody was there. My main bar back, I'll call him Carlos, told me about the ghost before I ever experienced it. So we've talked about ghosts a lot. Phantasma, we say, Spanish for ghost. After I saw the figure go into the kitchen and found the kitchen empty, I went over to Carlos, who was sleeping part of the dance floor. All I said to him was, "I think I just saw the phantasma." And he replies, "White t-shirt, this tall," gesturing a very short height with his hand. It immediately gave me goosebumps. "Yes," I said. He replies with something like, "Yeah, I saw him walk into the kitchen earlier." I went back there to tell him he couldn't be there, but nobody was there. The barbacks claim to experience a lot in the kitchen. The December before the pandemic, my husband and I attended a party on the Queen Mary and rented a room on the ship for the occasion. I was very excited as I had never been on a ship like that before. I had also heard stories about one of the pools being haunted by the ghost of a little girl. After the party ended around 11 p.m, we changed our clothes into something more comfortable because I wanted to wander the ship and explore. They kicked everyone off the ship who wasn't staying the night there. We spent a couple hours wandering that amazing ship inside and out. Before we finished up, we went back down to the level the party had been on, only now it was completely empty. Same level as the pool, by the way, which they had closed up. But you could still look through the windows, which I absolutely did. I spent a good 5 minutes with my face pressed up to those windows before we walked on. I didn't see anything. After walking down a short hallway, we were in the enormous empty ballroom, which had been so bustling just a few hours earlier. My husband picked up a broken drumstick left behind from one of the bands. Just then, from the direction of the pool came a loud child's laugh coming towards us, as if a little kid was running our direction down the hallway laughing loudly. I immediately locked eyes with my husband. "It's just a kid," he says dismissively, but there is no kid. We're alone on that entire floor. I look at my watch and it says 1:01 a.m. We go back to our room, seeing no one else along the way. Once in bed, I start Googling about Queen Mary ghost stuff. I found a forum that mentioned a common occurrence as hearing children's laughter around the pool area. We then discussed how we never saw any children that night, even during the party, which was for 21 and over, so why would we? We went to sleep feeling in awe and a tad eerie. I can still hear that laughter in my mind, clear as day. When I was a young child, around 6 or 7, I lived in a military housing in Portsmouth, England. The housing we lived in was a 3-bedroom one, with one small room for my little sister, my parents' bedroom next door, which was relatively small but slightly bigger, and then at the end of the hallway, me and my brother's room. Me and my brother had separate beds in the room at the end of the hallway. The room was fairly big, enough for 2 beds with a TV so we could play on our video games console and whatnot. Back then it was a PS1, which was cool. With all that in mind, here's where the story starts. So each bedroom had a wardrobe built into the wall, 2 doors and room enough to fit a chest of drawers with stuff hung up above if it need be. Me and my brother had a drawer inside our wardrobe to share, and we always left the doors open in case we wanted to quickly grab clothes. And as a Brucey bonus, the doors couldn't shut properly anyways. One morning, possibly around 5 a.m, I woke up and felt eerily cold, whispers in my right ear. My bed was opposite me and my brother's wardrobe, and it was telling me to look to my right. And as I slowly creeped my head around to look, there appeared to be a man dressed in blue overalls with a cloth hanging out his back pocket on all fours, on top of our chest of drawers, scrubbing. It sounds crazy, but he was scrubbing the top of the drawer, and every now and then would glance over at us and then carry out the same motion. This would be on repeat, and I remember it so vividly. I tried to whisper to my brother to look, but he was completely asleep, and I had to lie there in horror at this random bloke scrubbing my drawers. He never went away until eventually the sunlight broke through the window, and my brother eventually woke up, and I looked towards my brother's bed, and as I did, in the corner of my eye, the scrubby man just evaporated. It was only recently, after decades of telling my family about him, that my mum actually confirmed seeing him in my wardrobe when putting me and my brother to bed. But due to our financial situation and the fact he hadn't attacked any of us and seemed harmless, she took no note of it and pretended to not know what I was talking about when I mentioned it to her. The scrubby man, even to this day, it sends chills down my spine, but also makes me and my wife chuckle when we joke about it. Because we live in military accommodation ourselves now, and guess what we have in our son's room? A built-into-the-wall wardrobe. Yikes. I'm a 21-year-old guy from West Virginia, and I've lived in the state my whole entire life. And in 2013 or 14, I moved from my childhood home, and I currently reside about an hour or so away from where I grew up. I live with my mum and stepdad, and we live in this house, but not long after we moved in there, been some weird, odd things going on. I've never experienced anything paranormal related personally before the move. I've always been a believer, and have been very intrigued and interested in this kind of thing, and always wanted to experience it in some capacity. But whether it was real or not, I didn't know, until I experienced it myself. It took a few years before I would see or hear things going on in or around the house. But it was almost instant for my parents. But then again, I was never home much, as I was always with my grandparents a good majority of the time. It first started out when my stepdad lived here with his ex-wife and his children. But one thing they would experience is, it would sound like a loud bang or knock in his bedroom, but nothing much other ever really came of it. This was until after me and my mother moved in my mom would occasionally see shadows just start off. It made her feel uneasy, but at the same time, really didn't think much of it. After a while, it got to the point where we started seeing an older lady, and sometimes a little kid, maybe around the age of 4 or 6. Both were ghostly white gowns or dresses, to my current knowledge. As of writing this, I have not experienced or seen these two entities, nor has my stepdad seen them, but I would have to ask him just to make sure. Almost everything that happened within the last 6 to 7 years or so has been seen or heard by my mom, as I mentioned before. My mum was never home and my dad is always working, so it's always her and our 3 cats just chilling, doing whatever it is they do. But about 5 to 6 years ago, I was home alone, and I walked out of my room and it looked to have been possibly something standing in front of my parents' bedroom door. But as soon as I locked eyes with it, it was gone in the blink of an eye. But truly, it terrified me. But I don't think I actually saw anything that night. I think it's my mind playing tricks on me, because at the time, I was still new to staying at home by myself. Not too long after we were gathered up in the bedroom watching a movie, and out of the corner of my eye, saw from under the door, it looked like somebody walked past. I got up to check and there was nobody in the house. Me, my mum and dad were all in the bedroom, so I know for a fact no one else was in the house at this time, besides us 3. Not long after that, my parents came home late one night, and as they walked by the sliding glass door, they saw what looked to have been an older lady walk towards my bedroom. When I got in the house, there was nobody in or around my bedroom or any other room towards the area she walked to. From time to time after that as well, my mum would hear someone or something called her name. Now this was only happened once, from what I can remember. Not long after that stuff died down for a while, but recently stuff started to pop up again, in the form of loud stomps and thuds, These mostly, if not always, happen in my room when I'm playing Xbox or blaring Spotify in my headset. And I just want to clarify that I listen to loud music like rock and metal. So any outside noises or people I would not know or hear, unless someone flicked the light on to get my attention or tapped me on my shoulder. During this time when I'm listening to my music and I'm the most vulnerable to getting jump scared, almost every time, as I can't hear things, I'm in my own little world when I'm listening to loud headset music. So if someone taps me on the shoulder or turns on the light, it scares the living crap out of me. When I'm sitting there doing either listening to music or gaming, it sounds like someone comes beside me and either stops as hard as they can or drops a cinder block beside me. That's how hard and loud these thuds are. What strikes me odd is it occasionally happens like maybe once or twice a week. Sometimes I can hear it over my loud music. Sometimes I can feel it. Sometimes even both at the same time, and it gets me every single time. And it only happens when I'm doing those things or have a headset on, or if something is blocking my ears and I have no explanation for any of it. Now, I've rarely or if at all been home since late December, and since then, everything has been normal and quiet.